The storm was alive. Winds screamed across the frozen land like angry voices, shaking the ground and tearing through the sky. Snow fell in endless waves, sharp as glass, biting into anything that dared to move outside. The planet had always been cold, but tonight was different. Tonight, it was a storm meant to kill. Through the endless white, a small figure struggled to walk. It was not a human child, though at first glance it looked almost the same. Its arms were thin, its skin pale blue and glowing faintly in the dark. Its eyes were larger than human eyes, round and shining like wet glass. The child's breath came out in short bursts of steam, each one freezing in the air before fading into nothing. The child stumbled forward, crying. But even the tears refused to fall. They froze the moment they touched the skin, turning into tiny crystals that clung to the child's cheeks. His small hands shook as he tried to brush them away, but the cold burned too deep. He called out in a soft voice, but the wind swallowed the sound. There was no answer. Everywhere around him was white. No sky, no ground, only the storm. It was as if the world had erased itself, leaving only this little one to wander through nothing. His feet sank into the snow, each step harder than the last. His thin legs trembled. His body swayed. The storm seemed to laugh at him, pushing him down again and again. Still he stood up. Still he kept walking. The child was looking for something, or maybe for someone. His lips moved with a single word, whispered again and again. Mother. Mother. His voice broke, weak, almost lost. The night grew colder, the wind sharper. His body was slowing down. His chest rose and fell too quickly, as if his heart knew the end was near. The crystals on his face glowed faintly, the frozen tears shining like tiny stars. For a moment it almost looked beautiful, like the child himself was made of light. But beauty would not save him. The storm pressed harder, cruel and endless. The child's legs finally gave up. He dropped into the snow, too tired to stand again. His small hands tried to push himself up, but the strength was gone. The cold seeped into his bones, into his heart. His head fell forward and the world grew darker. The snow wrapped around him like a blanket. The storm's voice was louder now, howling like a monster claiming its prize. The child's eyes began to close. He whispered one last time, "Mother," but the sound was carried away. It should have ended there, it would have ended there. But fate had other plans. Through the storm, far away, a shadow moved. A figure larger, stronger, but still struggling against the wind. Step by step, it forced its way forward. At first, the figure seemed almost like part of the storm itself, covered in snow, bent against the wind. But slowly the shape became clearer, a tall form, heavy boots, a thick coat torn from the fight with the storm, and a mask of glass over the face glowing faintly with human technology. A human. He was not supposed to be here. His ship had fallen from the sky, broken by this same storm. He should have died too. But humans had always been stubborn creatures. This one was more stubborn than most. He had no map, no base, no help. Only broken equipment, failing heat, and the will to keep moving. The human stopped suddenly. Through the wall of snow he saw it, a glow. Faint trembling, but there. His eyes narrowed behind the glass mask. Was it fire? A crystal? Or was it something alive? He forced his way closer. His boots sank deep. His gloves froze stiff. His lungs burned with the thin air. But still he moved toward the light. Step by step, breath by breath, until finally he saw the truth. A child. The alien child lay half buried in the snow, glowing faintly under the storm's shadow. The human froze for a moment, shocked. He had never seen such a creature before. Blue skin, frozen tears, eyes too large, too full of pain. For a heartbeat he thought the child was dead. But then he saw the chest move. Small, weak, but still alive. Something stirred in the human's heart. He did not know this child. He did not even know if the species was friend or enemy. But in that moment none of it mattered. A life was a life. And this life was slipping away. The human dropped to his knees, brushing away the snow. The child did not react. His lips were blue, his body limp. The human lifted him, wrapping his own coat tighter around the fragile frame. The child was so light it felt as if he carried nothing at all. Too light. The human stood, holding the child close. The storm screamed louder, as if it was furious at being defied. The snow hit harder, the wind roared stronger, but the human did not stop. Step after step he pushed forward, carrying the child against his chest. The frozen tears glowed brighter now, lighting the path in the dark. The storm had taken many lives. But tonight, it would not take this one, not while a human still breathed. The human arrival, the human staggered through the storm like a broken soldier fighting his last war. His boots were heavy with ice. His gloves were torn. The wind cut into his skin even through layers of fabric, biting deep like knives. Every step was an effort, every breath a punishment. Yet he walked on. His name did not matter here, not in this endless storm. What mattered was survival. And survival had already betrayed him once tonight. His ship, once proud and strong, was now shattered metal buried under snow miles behind him. Sparks still flickered in the wreck when he left. But they would soon die like everything else in this frozen land. He was alone, or so he thought. The storm screamed louder, throwing walls of snow against him, forcing him to bend lower. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward. His oxygen tank was running low. The gauge blinked red inside his mask, reminding him that even air could betray a man here. The heat module on his chest blinked weakly, almost dead. He had little left, but then in the distance he saw it. A glow. At first he thought his mind was playing tricks. Perhaps his failing eyes were making false lights like dying stars inside his skull. But no, the glow was real. It pulsed faintly, soft and blue in the middle of the storm. Something was out there. He forced his frozen legs to move faster. The snow swallowed his boots, but he tore them free. His lungs burned, but he kept breathing. The glow was hope, and hope was the one thing he refused to lose, and then he saw it clearly. A child. Not human. Not anything he had seen before. The small body was curled in the snow, shaking weakly, skin glowing with faint light. The face was strange yet familiar. Eyes too large, cheeks covered in frozen crystals that looked like diamonds. Tears frozen before they could fall. The storm clawed at the child, trying to bury him alive. The human froze, his heart pounding. He had heard stories of other races, but he never believed he would see one with his own eyes. And not like this. Not so fragile. Not so close to death. For a moment, fear whispered in his mind. What if this was a trap? What if the child's kind were near, waiting to strike? He was alone, weak, one step from death himself. Helping could be suicide, but then the child whispered. A sound so faint it was almost stolen by the wind. One word broken and trembling, "Mother." The human's chest tightened. That single word killed his fear. It was not a trap. It was not a trick. It was the voice of a lost child crying for his mother in the dark. Without another thought, the human dropped to his knees. He brushed away snow from the child's face, his gloves rough against the frozen skin. The child's lips were blue. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. Still alive, but not for long. The human acted quickly. He pulled open his torn coat and pressed the child against his chest, trying to share what little warmth he had left. The child was so light, too light, as if the storm had already stolen half of him away. The human stood again, clutching the child tightly. His mask fogged with heavy breath. His arms trembled from the weight, but he held on. The storm roared louder. The wind slammed against him as if the planet itself hated his choice. But the human did not care. He had made his decision. He would not let this child die. He stumbled through the snow, searching for cover. The world was endless white, but he knew he needed shelter. A cave, a crack in the mountains, anything to shield them from the storm. His eyes scanned the shifting blizzard, desperate for hope. Minutes turned into hours. The child was silent now, only breathing faintly against his chest. The human's arms ached, his back screamed, but he refused to drop the boy. He cursed the storm, cursed the sky, cursed his broken ship, but he kept walking. Finally, his eyes caught a shadow in the distance, a jagged line across the snow, darker than the white around it. Rocks, a ridge, and there an opening, a cave. His heart kicked inside his chest. Shelter. He forced himself forward, every step a battle. Snow fought him, ice clutched at him, but he broke through. He reached the cave's mouth and stumbled inside, nearly falling as his knees buckled. Darkness wrapped around him, but it was safe darkness. The wind was muffled, the snow stopped biting. The cave was cold, but it was still warmer than the storm outside. The human collapsed onto the ground, holding the child tightly. His chest rose and fell heavily, his lungs burning. He wanted to rest, to close his eyes, but he couldn't. The child's breath was too shallow, too faint. He tore open his emergency pack. A small heater, a blanket, a light. His hands shook, but he worked fast. He wrapped the blanket around the child, set the heater close, and rubbed the boy's arms to bring warmth back. The child's eyelids fluttered. His lips parted. He whispered again, weaker this time, almost a ghost of sound. "Mother." The human stared at him. He could not understand the rest of the language, but that word was clear enough. "Mother." The human exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the cold air. He pulled the child closer, whispering softly, almost like a promise. "You'll see her again. I'll make sure of it." The storm outside roared in anger, but inside the cave something new had begun. Two strangers. Two different worlds. But for this night, they had only each other, and the storm would not take them. Not tonight. The struggle for survival. The cave was cold, but at least the storm's claws could not reach them here. The human leaned his back against the stone wall, chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. His arm still ached from carrying the child, but he refused to let go. The boy's body was light as air, frighteningly weak, yet his faint breath told the human there was still hope. The small heater glowed dimly, giving a circle of warmth around them. The man tightened the blanket around the child and pressed him closer to the heat. Snowflakes melted off his glowing skin, leaving trails of water that froze again on the cave floor. For a long time there was only silence, broken only by the crackle of the heater and the distant howling of the storm outside. The human's eyelids grew heavy. He wanted to rest, to shut out the pain and the cold. But then the child stirred. The boy's large eyes opened slowly. They were cloudy at first, unfocused, but then they locked onto the human. A small sound came from his throat, weak and trembling. The human bent closer. "Mother," the boy whispered again. The man closed his eyes for a moment. That word had carried the boy this far, but the mother was nowhere near. He couldn't explain that. He couldn't even speak the boy's language. But he could offer comfort. "I'll find her," the man said softly, though he knew the boy would not understand. "I promise." The boy blinked slowly, as if sensing the meaning even without the words. His small hand reached out, brushing against the man's coat. It was a simple touch, but it carried something deeper. Trust. The human nodded, feeling the weight of that trust heavy in his chest. The hours crawled by. The heater flickered, running low. The man knew it would not last long. His supplies were almost gone. One pack of dried food, one small water flask, and a failing power cell. Even if the storm cleared, survival would not be easy. The boy coughed, a weak sound that echoed painfully in the stone chamber. His glowing skin flickered, dimming like a dying ember. The man's jaw tightened. If the boy lost that glow, he would lose more than warmth. He would lose life itself. The man moved quickly. He unstrapped the small scanner from his belt, one of the few tools that had survived the crash. The device buzzed faintly, scanning the boy's body. Strange symbols appeared on the screen. None of it made sense. His training was in mechanics, not medicine. But one thing was clear. The boy's temperature was dropping too fast. The man cursed under his breath. He pulled off one of his gloves, ignoring the sting of the cold, and pressed his bare hand against the boy's skin. The glow brightened slightly, reacting to his touch. The boy's breathing steadied. The man blinked in surprise. "So that's it. You need warmth." He pulled the child against his chest again, wrapping both of them tightly in the blanket. The heater burned its last light and went dark, but the man held on, letting his own body heat bleed into the boy. Minutes passed. Then hours. The boy's glow flickered back to life, faint but steady. The human smiled faintly. He was exhausted, his body trembling, but he had kept the boy alive. By the next morning, the storm outside had not ended. Snow still howled at the cave entrance, but inside, the boy was stronger. He sat upright now, though his body still shook. His eyes followed the human closely. The man opened his pack, breaking the dried food into smaller pieces. He chewed slowly, then offered a piece to the boy. At first, the child frowned, not understanding. Then he sniffed it, tasted it carefully, and finally swallowed. His glowing eyes widened as though surprised by the strange flavor. The man chuckled softly. "Not much of a feast, huh?" The boy tilted his head, not understanding the words, but his lips curved into the smallest of smiles. It was the first time he had smiled since the human found him. That tiny smile was enough to push the man forward, but their struggle was far from over. The man's oxygen supply was nearly empty. His power cell was gone. His ship was destroyed. The storm could last for days, maybe weeks. They could not stay here. He looked at the boy, then at the cave entrance. The boy needed his mother. The man needed supplies. Both answers lay somewhere beyond the storm. The child seemed to sense his thoughts. He pointed toward the mountains, his small hand trembling but certain. His lips moved, speaking words the man couldn't understand. But one thing was clear. He knew the way. The human frowned. The mountains were far dangerous and deadly in this weather. But what choice did he have? To stay here was to die slowly. To move was to risk everything. He looked at the boy again. Those large, glowing eyes stared back at him full of trust. The human's decision was made. That night, as the storm raged outside, he prepared. He secured the blanket tightly around the boy. He checked his gear, though most of it was useless now. His knife, a single flare, and his will to keep moving. That was all he had left. The boy curled close to him, whispering softly again. "Mother." The human tightened his grip on the child and whispered back, a vow carried in the silence. "Tomorrow, we go find her." The storm roared, but inside the cave, hope burned brighter than fear. A bond forms. The cave had become their fragile world. The storm outside still roared, but inside silence rested between stone walls. The human sat with his back against the cold rock. The child curled close to his chest. Their breath rose in small clouds, mingling in the dim light of a single flickering flare. The human studied the boy carefully. His skin still glowed faintly, though the brightness returned in pulses as if tied to the rhythm of his heartbeat. Every time the light dimmed, the man felt his own chest tighten with fear. But the glow always returned, steady and soft. The boy's large eyes followed the man's movements with quiet curiosity. When the man chewed on a small piece of dried food, the boy copied him, biting clumsily but swallowing with effort. When the man drank water, the boy tilted his head, watching closely as if memorizing each motion. They could not share words, but they shared actions, and slowly actions became a language of their own. On the second day, the boy pointed at the man's chest, where a small patch of torn fabric revealed an old scar. The human looked down, then touched the scar lightly, shaking his head as if to say it's nothing. The boy's eyes softened, and he pressed his glowing hand against it. The warmth spread faintly through the man's chest, easing the ache in his bones. The human blinked in surprise. The boy could not heal fully, but he could give comfort. A gift, small but powerful. Later, when the man's hands trembled from cold, the boy shuffled closer and pressed a glowing crystal into his palm. It was small, no bigger than a stone, but it radiated a gentle heat. The man closed his fingers around it, amazed. The warmth seeped into his skin, stronger than his broken heater. "You've been holding out on me," the man muttered with a faint smile. The boy tilted his head at the sound of his voice, not knowing the words but sensing the warmth behind them. He smiled back, a small and shy curve of his lips. For the first time since the crash, the human laughed softly. Not loud, not long, but enough to push away the silence of fear. At night, when the wind howled against the cave walls, the boy sometimes cried in his sleep. He whispered again and again, "Mother, Mother." His small hands clutched the blanket tightly, his face wet with frozen tears. The human would pull him close, resting his gloved hand on the boy's shoulder. He could not bring the mother here, but he could give the boy safety in the dark. "You're not alone," he whispered, though the child could not understand. But perhaps the boy felt the promise in the human's heartbeat, steady and strong against his small frame. By the third day, the storm had weakened, though it still carried sharp winds. The human knew they could not wait much longer. His oxygen supply blinked dangerously low and food was almost gone. But before they left, something shifted between them. The boy began to mimic the man's words. Not perfectly, not even clearly, but enough to echo the sounds. When the man pointed at himself and said, "Man," the boy touched his chest and repeated softly, "Ma." When the man pointed at the boy and said, "Boy," the child answered, "Bo." The man smiled at the effort. It was clumsy, but it was a bridge, a bond. In return, the boy taught him too. He pointed at himself and spoke his name, though it was strange, full of soft clicks and tones the man could not shape with his mouth. Still, the man tried. He repeated the sounds, stumbling through them until the boy giggled at his failure. That giggle was worth more than warmth. It was life itself. The cave became a classroom, a place of shared survival and discovery. The man drew shapes in the frost on the stone floor, circles, lines, stars. The boy copied them with glowing fingers, his marks shining like fireflies. One night, the boy drew something different. A tall figure with long arms, glowing brighter than him. Next to it, he drew a small shape himself. He touched the larger figure and whispered, "Mother." The man stared at the glowing image. The mother was real, and the boy remembered her. That meant she was still out there, somewhere in the storm, somewhere beyond the mountains. The boy pressed his glowing crystal into the man's hand again, looking up with wide eyes. The meaning was clear. "Help me find her." The man's throat tightened. He nodded once, firmly. "Yes," he said softly. "We'll find her." The boy didn't know the words, but he smiled as if he had heard the promise anyway. When morning came, the storm had weakened enough to travel. The human gathered his few supplies: knife, flare, the glowing crystal, and the boy. He wrapped the blanket tightly around the child and secured him to his chest with torn straps from his pack. The boy's head rested against his shoulder, glowing faintly in the dim cave light. The man looked once at the cave where they had survived. This place had been more than shelter. It had been the start of something unexpected. Two strangers, two lives now tied together. As he stepped into the snow again, the storm met them with sharp winds, but the human did not bend this time. He carried more than his own life now, and in his chest, where fear had once lived, there was something stronger. A bond. The dangerous journey, the storm had not ended, but it had grown weaker. The snow no longer fell like knives, only like a heavy blanket spread across the land. To the human, it was still deadly. To the boy, it was still frightening. But compared to the first night, it was a chance to move. The human tightened the straps around his chest, making sure the boy was secure against him. The child's head rested on his shoulder, glowing faintly under the blanket. The light was soft, like a lantern carried in the dark. Without it, the endless white would have swallowed them whole. He took his first step into the snow. It sank deep, almost to his knees, but he forced his way forward. The mountains loomed in the distance, tall, black shapes cutting into the sky. The boy had pointed toward them, and the man trusted that gesture. Somewhere beyond those peaks, the mother waited. But between here and there lay a wasteland. The cold bit into him again, sharper now that his supplies were low. His oxygen tank blinked red inside the mask. He had maybe a day left before the air turned thin. His food was almost gone. His strength was fading. But every time he felt his knees weaken, he looked at the boy's glowing eyes, watching him with quiet trust. That was enough to keep him moving. The land was cruel. Ice stretched across deep cracks thin enough to break under his boots. The wind carried strange howls, not just from the storm, but from creatures that lived here. Things adapted to hunt in the snow. He gripped his knife tightly, every sense sharp. Hours passed. His legs burned with pain, his back screamed from the weight. But he walked on. The boy, though weak, tried to help. He pointed out glowing crystals half buried in the ice. The man picked them up, using them for warmth when his own strength faltered. For a brief moment, they rested near a frozen river. The man broke the ice with his knife, letting the boy drink. The boy smiled faintly, his voice weak but steady. He whispered the word again. "Mother," the man nodded. "We'll get there." But as if the world wanted to prove him wrong, danger arrived. The first sound was low, a rumble beneath the snow, like thunder trapped underground. The boy stiffened, clutching the man's coat. The human froze, his breath catching. The rumble grew louder, closer. Then the ground cracked. A shape burst from the snow, tall and monstrous. Its body was pale as ice, its mouth wide with jagged teeth. 6 limbs clawed at the snow, pulling it forward like a nightmare from the storm itself. Its eyes glowed faint blue, fixed on the human and the boy. The man's heart slammed against his chest. He had no gun, only a knife and his will to fight. But running was useless. The creature was faster in the snow. The boy clung tighter, glowing brighter, as if his fear had sparked his light. The monster screeched, blinded for a moment. The man seized the chance. He pulled the flare from his pack, snapped it open, and fire burst into life. Red light tore through the storm, crackling with heat. The creature shrieked, recoiling. The man held the flare high in one hand, knife in the other. He shouted through the mask, his voice swallowed by the storm, but his defiance clear. Not today. The beast lunged once, twice, but the heat of the flare drove it back. Its pale body twisted, retreating into the snow. For a moment, silence returned. The man's arms shook. His chest heaved. The flare hissed, burning down too quickly. But they had survived. He looked down. The boy's glowing eyes stared up at him, wide with fear but also shining with something else. Faith. The boy trusted him, truly trusted him. That trust was heavier than the storm, and stronger. The journey did not get easier. Each step was slower, each breath harder. The mountains seemed to grow taller as they walked. But now the man had a new fire inside him. Not just survival, not just hope, a promise. At night they sheltered under rocky ledges, the boy's glow keeping them warm. The man told stories in a soft voice, even though the boy could not understand. Stories of Earth, of stars, of people who refused to give up. The boy listened with wide eyes, as if the meaning reached him anyway. When the man's strength faltered, the boy pressed glowing crystals into his palm. When the boy cried for his mother, the man held him close, whispering that they would find her. The bond they had built in the cave now carried them across the wasteland. At last, after days of struggle, they reached the base of the mountains. The cliffs rose high, black against the white storm. The path upward was narrow, carved by wind and time. It would not be easy. The man stood at the base, looking up at the impossible climb. His body ached, his oxygen nearly gone, his food long finished. But the boy tugged at his coat, pointing upward. His glow pulsed brighter as if urging him on. The human tightened his grip on the child. He looked at the mountain, at the storm above, and at the glow in his arms. Then he placed his boot on the first step of ice. The dangerous journey had only begun. The mother's call. The mountains rose like giants, their peaks hidden by clouds. Black stone cut into the white sky, sharp and merciless. The human stood at the base, carrying the boy against his chest. His breath came out in heavy bursts, fogging the mask with each exhale. His muscles were weak, his oxygen nearly gone, but he had no choice. The path led upward, and upward they had to go. The boy's glow pulsed faintly in the storm, casting a soft light on the frozen rocks. He was quiet, but his eyes were fixed on the cliffs, as if he knew. Somewhere beyond the stone, someone was waiting for him. The man tightened his grip and began the climb. The trail was cruel. Ice cracked beneath his boots. Snow slid down in sheets, threatening to pull them both into the abyss. The human's hands clutched jagged rocks, scraping his skin through torn gloves. His chest burned with every step, but he kept moving. At times, the wind screamed so loud it drowned out his own thoughts. At times, the boy clutched him tighter, burying his face in the man's coat. Each time the man wanted to stop, he heard the boy whisper the same word. Mother. That word was no longer just the boy's call. It had become the man's promise. Hours turned into days. They rested in cracks between rocks, sleeping in short bursts. The man chewed on ice for water, his body thin and weak. The boy shared his glowing crystals, warming them both through the endless nights. But the climb was not only a test of strength. It was a test of faith. On the fourth night, the storm grew strangely quiet. The human sat with the boy on his lap, staring at the dark sky. For the first time in weeks, he could see the stars, cold, distant, but shining. The boy lifted his head, eyes glowing brighter than usual. His small lips parted. And then he spoke, not the weak whisper of before, but something new. A sound. A song. It was soft at first, like the hum of wind through glass. Then it grew, rising and falling in strange tones the human had never heard before. The boy's voice was fragile but pure, echoing off the stone walls. The man froze, listening. It wasn't random. It wasn't just sound. It was a call. The boy's tears glowed, not frozen this time, but shining trails across his cheeks. His voice shook with longing, with pain, with hope. And somewhere, deep in the mountains, an answer came. The wind carried it faintly at first, almost too soft to believe. A second voice, older, stronger, filled with sorrow and love. It echoed through the cliffs, weaving through the storm. The boy gasped, eyes wide. He pressed a glowing hand against the man's chest and whispered, "Mother." The man's heart pounded. He heard it too, a voice. Not his imagination, not a dream. Real. The mother was calling back. The next morning, the boy was restless, urging the man onward. He pointed again and again, his small voice repeating the song in broken pieces. The human, though weak and nearly broken himself, followed without hesitation. The path grew steeper. Ice cracked beneath him, rocks tore at his hands. Once his boot slipped, and for a terrifying second they dangled over nothing. But he slammed his hand into the stone, holding on with every ounce of strength left. The boy clung to him, whispering the song again, guiding him upward. At last they reached a plateau. The storm broke here, the sky clearing into a pale blue. The boy's glow brightened, reflecting on the ice around them. And then the humans saw it. In the distance, hidden in the mountains, stood a valley of light. Towers of crystal rose high, glowing softly. Strange figures moved within, tall, radiant, their bodies shining with the same glow as the boy. The settlement. His people. His mother. The boy cried out, his voice shaking the air with joy and fear. His glow burst brighter, a beacon in the snow. But the man froze. His body went still, not from exhaustion but from fear. What if they did not welcome him? What if they saw him as a threat, a stranger carrying one of their own? What if they attacked? The boy noticed his hesitation. He looked up, his glowing eyes filled with trust. He pressed his small hand against the man's chest as if to say, "Come, you brought me this far." "Don't stop now." The human closed his eyes, then nodded. He took one step forward, then another. The valley of light waited ahead, glowing brighter with each heartbeat. And from within the settlement, the mother's call rose again, strong, clear, and undeniable. The boy's tears fell once more, but this time, they did not freeze. They shone like stars, guiding them home. Reunion and farewell. The valley of light shimmered before them. Crystal towers glowed with soft colors, painting the snow in shades of blue and gold. The storm had ended here, as if this place was guarded by something greater than nature. The human stood at the edge, carrying the boy close against his chest. His legs trembled from the climb. His lungs burned with every breath, but he kept walking. The boy stirred, lifting his head. His eyes widened, shining brighter than ever. His small voice cracked with emotion as he whispered one word, not in fear this time, but in joy. "Mother." The sound carried across the valley. Figures emerged from the settlement, tall and radiant, their skin glowing like polished crystal. Their movements were slow and graceful, almost otherworldly. They surrounded the human, their eyes filled with caution. For a moment he felt the weight of their gaze pressing down, cold and sharp. He tightened his grip on the boy, ready to protect him even now. Then one figure broke from the group. Taller than the rest, her glow brighter, her steps desperate. She rushed forward, her voice breaking into a cry that echoed across the valley. The boy's eyes filled with tears, glowing trails on his cheeks. He reached out with trembling hands, his voice rising with joy. "Mother!" The alien woman fell to her knees in the snow, pulling the child into her arms. Her body shook with sobs, her light flaring brighter as if the mountains themselves shared her relief. She pressed her face against the boy's, whispering words in a language the human could not understand but could feel in his bones. The boy clung to her tightly, his small frame lost in her embrace. For the first time since the storm, he looked safe, whole. The human stood back, his chest heavy. His mission was complete. The boy was no longer his burden to carry. He belonged here with his mother, with his people. Yet as he turned to leave, a voice stopped him. The alien woman rose, still holding the child. Her glowing eyes met the human's. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped forward, bowing her head. It was not fear, not anger. It was gratitude. The other figures followed, lowering their heads as well. The human froze, stunned. He had expected suspicion, even violence. Instead, he was being honored. The boy reached out from his mother's arms, stretching his small hand toward the human. His glow pulsed softly, calling him closer. The man knelt, meeting the boy's eyes one last time. The child pressed a small crystal into his palm, warm and alive with faint light. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Friend." The human's throat tightened. He closed his fingers around the gift and nodded. "Friend?" he echoed softly. The aliens guided him to their settlement. Inside the crystal towers, warmth radiated through the air, banishing the cold that had haunted him for weeks. They offered him food unlike anything he had seen before, soft fruits that glowed faintly, drinks that restored strength to his bones. He ate, though his thoughts stayed on the boy and his mother, still locked in their reunion. When his body was stronger, the aliens brought him to a chamber where his ship's broken pieces had been gathered. They had repaired it better than it had ever been. The sleek metal shone with their glowing touch, humming with new energy. It was a gift beyond measure. The human ran his hand across the restored hull. He could leave now, return to the stars, but leaving felt harder than he imagined. On the morning of his departure, the valley gathered to see him off. The aliens stood in silence, their glowing bodies lighting the snow. The mother held the boy, who leaned against her shoulder, eyes fixed on the human. The man climbed into the ship, but before sealing the hatch, he looked out one last time. The boy's eyes met his. So much had passed between them without words: fear, struggle, hope, trust. Now nothing needed to be said. The boy lifted his hand in farewell. The crystal in the human's pocket warmed as if alive. The man lifted his own hand in return. The engines roared to life, lifting the ship into the sky. The valley of light grew smaller below, the storm far behind. But inside the cockpit, the glow of the crystal burned softly, a reminder of the bond they had forged. The human whispered to himself as the stars opened before him. I saved him, but in truth, he saved me too. The ship vanished into the night sky, carrying him back to the unknown. And far below, in the valley of light, a child watched the stars, his small hand still raised, his glow shining brighter than ever.